The town was a quiet place where everyone knew each other. Children walked freely on the streets, parents greeted neighbors with smiles, and there was always a sense of safety when people saw the men and women in uniform. A policeman walking by usually brought comfort. People thought of discipline, protection, and service. That was why the little girl trusted the badge, the cap, and the blue uniform. To her, it meant nothing bad could happen when a policeman was around. One sunny afternoon, the girl was walking home from school. She carried her small bag over her shoulder and hummed a little tune as she skipped along the pavement. She had seen the same policeman standing at the street corner many times before. Sometimes he waved at her, sometimes he asked how school was, and she always thought he was just being friendly. That day, as she walked closer, she saw him smile and step toward her. She smiled back politely, not expecting anything unusual. At first, their short talk seemed ordinary. He asked how her school day had gone, and she replied softly that she had done her homework already. She thought it was just another short meeting on the street, like the kind of conversations she had with shopkeepers or neighbors. But suddenly, everything changed. Without warning, the policeman leaned down, stuck out his tongue, and touched her face with it. The little girl froze. She did not understand why he had done that. She stepped back quickly, her eyes wide with surprise. She felt a wave of discomfort, almost as if her small world of trust had cracked. For a moment, she didn't know whether to run, cry, or shout. She looked around, but no one else was nearby. The street seemed silent, almost like it had turned into a different place. She didn't say anything to him. Instead, she quickly turned and began walking home faster than before. Her heart was racing, her small hands clutched tightly to the straps of her bag, and her mind was filled with confusion. Why would someone in uniform, someone who was supposed to protect her, do something so strange? By the time she reached her front door, she was out of breath. She pushed the door open and went straight to her mother. Her mother noticed her daughter's pale face and worried eyes immediately. She asked what had happened. The girl hesitated for a moment, almost unsure how to explain, but then she told her mother everything, word by word. The mother's hands trembled as she listened. She hugged her daughter tightly, whispering that she was safe now, but deep inside, she felt a storm of anger and disbelief. Her husband was called into the room, and the story was told again. The father, usually calm and measured, was shocked beyond words. He paced the room, then sat down, trying to control his emotions. Both parents knew one thing for sure: this was unacceptable. They promised their daughter that she had done nothing wrong and that they would not let this pass silently. They reassured her that she was brave for speaking up so quickly, and they praised her for trusting them with the truth. That night, the house was filled with heavy silence. The little girl sat quietly at the dinner table, not eating much. Her parents kept glancing at her, each time feeling more determined to take action. They knew the respect for the uniform could only remain if wrong actions were addressed. They also knew that silence would mean letting fear win. The next morning, the parents took their daughter to the police station. They asked to speak with the duty officer and explained what had happened. The officer on duty listened carefully, his face showing surprise and concern. He took notes and asked for details. The little girl spoke softly but clearly, repeating what had happened. She clung to her mother's hand as she told her story, but she did not look away. She wanted the truth to be known. Inside the police station, the atmosphere became tense. Officers in the background whispered quietly to each other. Some shook their heads, unable to believe a colleague could do such a thing. Others looked embarrassed, knowing the community would lose trust if this was ignored. The head officer was informed quickly. He called the parents into his office, apologized for what had happened, and promised a full review. The little girl was asked if she could write down what she remembered in her own words. She did, slowly and carefully, her small handwriting covering the paper. Her parents signed as witnesses. The seriousness of the moment was clear to everyone in the room. This was not just a complaint. This was a call for accountability. When they left the station, the parents felt both heavy and relieved. Heavy because their daughter had gone through something that never should have happened, but relieved because they had taken the first step toward justice. The girl herself felt lighter after telling her story to people who listened and took it seriously. She still carried fear in her heart, but she also carried the knowledge that her parents stood beside her firmly. Back at home, the girl sat by the window, looking at the street where everything had begun. She wondered what would happen next. She wondered if people would believe her. She wondered if she would ever feel the same comfort again when she saw someone in uniform. Her parents came to her side, holding her hands, and told her she was not alone. They told her she was strong and that telling the truth was the most powerful thing she could have done. The first step of the story was now written. A family had spoken up. A police station had opened its doors to listen. A little girl had shown courage, and her parents had promised that silence would not be their choice. What began as a simple walk home from school had turned into a turning point for their lives. The act that broke their trust had also built their determination to seek justice. That day, in the heart of the quiet town, the beginning of a larger story had been set in motion. The morning after the complaint was filed, the little girl stayed home from school. Her parents thought it was better to give her rest and keep her close. She sat in the living room with her small notebook, quietly drawing pictures of flowers and houses. On the outside, it looked like a normal day, but deep inside, she was still unsettled. Every time she remembered the strange act on the street, her heart raced. Yet she also remembered the way her parents had stood tall in the police station. That gave her comfort. At the station, the story had already begun to spread among the officers. A complaint against one of their own was not an everyday matter, especially not one involving a child. Some officers spoke in hushed voices, shocked that such a report could exist. Others avoided eye contact, unsure of what to say. A few older officers whispered to each other, saying things like, "This will harm the respect for the entire department if it's true." The air was heavy with tension. The head officer wasted no time. He called a meeting with his senior staff. Around the table, files were opened, notes from the parents were placed carefully, and the written statement of the little girl was read aloud. The room grew quiet as everyone listened. It was clear that this was not something that could be ignored or hidden. The head officer's face showed a mixture of disappointment and seriousness. He reminded his team that the uniform they wore was meant to symbolize trust, and when that trust was broken, they had no choice but to act firmly. While the review process began, the family's life changed in small but noticeable ways. Neighbors came by to check on them. Some offered words of encouragement, saying how brave they were to speak up. Others whispered about the shame of the incident, not knowing how to process it. The parents stayed focused on protecting their daughter. They reassured her every night before she went to bed, telling her she was safe and loved. In the following days, the police department asked for further details. The little girl, with the help of her parents, described the exact street corner where it happened, the time of day, and everything she remembered about the moment. A psychologist from the town was invited to speak with her gently, making sure she felt supported. The girl was shy at first, but slowly, she began to open up. She explained how she had trusted the policeman before and how this one moment had changed her view. Her words, though simple, carried great weight. The duty officer who had first received the complaint spoke privately with the head officer. He admitted that when he first heard the girl's story, he could see the fear in her eyes. He was convinced it was genuine. This gave the department even more reason to act quickly. They suspended the policeman involved while the investigation took place. It was not a punishment yet, but it meant he could not continue his duties until the matter was resolved. Back in the community, the news traveled faster than anyone expected. A local journalist got hold of the story and wrote a small column in the town newspaper. It was titled, "Complaint Filed Against Local Policeman." The article was careful with words, but it still created waves. Parents across the town were alarmed. If it could happen to one child, who could say it wouldn't happen again? Groups of mothers and fathers began gathering in homes, discussing how to make sure their children were safe. The little girl, though unaware of all the discussions happening around her, noticed changes in her routine. Her parents started walking her to school and picking her up every day. They made sure she was never alone on the street. She felt both protected and confused. Part of her longed for the freedom she had before, but part of her also felt grateful that her parents were always nearby. Inside the police station, the case was no longer just a file on a desk. It became a matter of reputation. The officers knew that the public was watching, and the media was beginning to ask questions. The head officer gave strict instructions: handle this matter with transparency. Do not hide anything. The truth must come out, whatever it is. His words set the tone for the entire department. The policeman accused of the act was called in for questioning. Sitting across the desk, he tried to dismiss the complaint as a misunderstanding, even calling it a joke. But the seriousness of the situation was made clear to him. The investigators reminded him that when someone wears the uniform, every action matters, no matter how small it may seem. What he called a joke had left a child shaken and a family distressed. That was not something to laugh about. Meanwhile, the little girl's parents received a call from community leaders. They were invited to speak in a small meeting where parents gathered to discuss child safety. At first, the mother hesitated. She did not want her daughter's story to be shared too openly. But the father explained that sometimes, telling the truth could protect many other children. So they agreed to attend. At the meeting, the parents spoke calmly but firmly. They explained how their daughter had been affected, how she had trusted the uniform, and how that trust had been broken. The room was silent as they spoke. Many parents wiped away tears, realizing how easily it could have been their own child. By the end of the evening, the community had made a decision: they would demand accountability, not just for this case, but for the future of their children's safety. The days turned into weeks, and the investigation deepened. More officers were interviewed, more reports were written, and more evidence was gathered. The girl's statement, her parents' determination, and the community's support made it clear that this was not something that could be hidden under silence. The little girl, though still young, began to notice the strength around her. She saw how her parents stood tall, how her neighbors offered support, and how people were talking about right and wrong more openly than before. She began to understand that even though one act had hurt her, many acts of kindness and courage were now helping her heal. At the end of those weeks, the review team submitted their findings. They confirmed that the officer's behavior was inappropriate and unacceptable. Though the final decision was yet to come, the direction was clear: justice was on its way. What had started as a single shocking moment on a quiet street had grown into a larger wave of truth. A family had spoken, the police department had listened, and the community had awakened. The story was no longer just about one girl and one officer. It was about the meaning of trust, the value of respect, and the strength of standing up when something wrong happens. The story did not stay inside the walls of the police station for long. Once the local newspaper printed a short article about the complaint, curiosity grew. By the end of the week, the news had reached the regional channels. Soon after, television reporters appeared in town, carrying cameras and microphones. They stood in front of the police station, speaking into the cameras about a disturbing case under investigation. People who had never met the little girl or her family now began discussing what had happened. On social media, the story spread even faster. Posts with the headline were shared hundreds of times. Some people expressed shock, others anger. Parents wrote long messages warning each other to stay alert. Community groups that focused on child safety shared the news widely, asking for justice. The little girl's family, sitting in their modest living room, watched all of this unfold on the television screen. It felt strange to see their personal story become a public matter, but they also felt relief that people cared enough to speak up. The police department realized quickly that the case could not be kept quiet. Reporters began calling the station non-stop, demanding statements. Some even tried to approach officers outside their homes for comments. Under the weight of public pressure, the department issued an official statement. They confirmed that a complaint had been filed, that the officer had been suspended, and that a full investigation was ongoing. They promised fairness and transparency, and they asked the public for patience until the review was complete. This official announcement did little to calm the community. Parents felt more worried than ever. If this could happen once, one mother said at a school meeting, what guarantee do we have that it won't happen again? The principal of the school called an emergency gathering of parents and teachers. They discussed ways to keep children safe, including walking groups, stricter monitoring around school exits, and closer cooperation with trusted officers. The little girl's story had become the reason for a wider conversation about safety and accountability. For the family, the attention was overwhelming. Strangers sent them letters and messages, praising the girl for being brave. Some families even sent flowers to their home. But there were also difficult moments. The father received calls from people warning him to stop pushing the matter too far. A few neighbors whispered that maybe the story was exaggerated. Yet the family refused to be shaken. They knew the truth, and they believed justice would win in the end. The little girl herself tried to live her days normally, but it wasn't easy. In school, some of her classmates whispered about her. A few children asked blunt questions that made her uncomfortable, while others defended her, saying she was brave. She tried to focus on her books, her drawings, and her friends who treated her kindly. At night, she sometimes cried softly, asking her mother, "Why did he do that? Was it my fault?" Her mother hugged her tightly each time, whispering that she had done nothing wrong. Those words became a comfort that slowly eased her worries. The suspended officer, meanwhile, became the focus of intense scrutiny. Reporters tried to follow him, neighbors spoke about him in anger, and his fellow officers kept their distance. He insisted it had all been a misunderstanding, but no one was ready to accept that explanation. The seriousness of the case had already crossed beyond his personal defense. It was now about the honor of the entire police force and the trust of the community. Inside the department, senior officials faced a difficult challenge. On one side, they had to protect the integrity of the investigation and avoid rushing to judgment. On the other side, they could see the public growing impatient. The head officer called a press conference. Standing before cameras, he said in firm words, "We will not allow any act that breaks public trust to go unpunished. If the investigation confirms misconduct, the department will take the strongest possible action." His statement was broadcast widely, bringing some relief to the worried parents across the town. The little girl's parents, watching the press conference, held hands tightly. They knew promises were easy to make, but actions mattered more. They continued attending community meetings, speaking with lawyers, and staying in touch with officials handling the case. They did everything they could to ensure that their daughter's voice would not be lost in the noise of bureaucracy. One evening, a local television channel invited the father to join a panel discussion about the case. At first, he hesitated. He did not want to expose his family too much. But after talking with his wife, he agreed. Sitting under bright studio lights, he spoke calmly about the importance of protecting children, about the courage of his daughter, and about the need for accountability. His words touched many viewers. Callers phoned into the live program, praising the family for their courage. As the weeks passed, the little girl's courage became a symbol. Teachers told their students about her bravery in speaking up. Community leaders used her example in speeches. Even children who had never met her began saying things like, "If something wrong happens, we should tell our parents, just like she did." In an unexpected way, her painful experience began planting seeds of awareness and strength in the minds of many. The investigation itself moved steadily. The officer's record was checked, his past behavior was reviewed, and his colleagues were interviewed. Although nothing as serious had been reported before, some officers admitted they had noticed odd behavior from him in the past but had never spoken up. These confessions added weight to the case. It showed that silence can sometimes hide problems until they grow too large to ignore. By the end of the third month, the investigation team submitted a detailed report to the senior officials. They confirmed that the act described by the girl was real, that her account was consistent from the first day, and that the officer's defense of it being a joke was not acceptable. The report also stated clearly that such behavior was unfit for anyone in uniform. The findings set the stage for the final decision. The family was informed that the results would soon be announced. The mother held her daughter's hand and told her gently, "You see, the truth always finds its way. You were strong enough to tell it, and now it will bring change." The little girl smiled faintly, not fully understanding the weight of those words but feeling the warmth of her mother's voice. The town itself had changed. People were more cautious, yes, but also more outspoken. Parents were no longer shy to question authority. Teachers were more alert when children spoke about their experiences. The badge on a uniform still commanded respect, but now people also demanded responsibility from those who wore it. What began as a shocking moment on a quiet street had become a movement of voices. The community's trust had been shaken, but in that shaking, a stronger bond of unity had formed. Everyone was waiting for the final step, the official verdict that would decide the fate of the officer and send a clear message about right and wrong. The stage was set for the next chapter. The investigation had already shaken the community, but when the suspended officer was finally brought in for a deeper round of questioning, the case became even more serious. Sitting in the interview room with senior officials, he tried to explain his behavior as something small, something that should not have caused so much trouble. But his words did not soften the mood. Every officer present understood that such an act was far from small. It was a direct violation of trust, and once trust is broken, it can rarely be repaired. The review committee studied every detail again. They looked at the girl's testimony, the statements of her parents, and the professional opinion of the psychologist who had spoken with her. They also compared the accounts of officers who had seen the suspended man at work before. A few admitted they had noticed him making jokes that were not appropriate, though none had thought it would lead to such behavior. This added to the conclusion that his explanation could not be excused as a harmless mistake. As the weeks passed, experts in law and ethics were invited to give their opinions. They spoke on television, on radio, and at community meetings. They explained that misconduct in uniform was not just about breaking rules, it was about damaging the foundation of public confidence. They reminded everyone that a uniform carried authority, and with authority came responsibility. The words of these experts reached far and wide, helping people understand why this matter had to be treated with seriousness. The suspended officer's family also came under attention. Some relatives defended him, insisting he was misunderstood. Others stayed silent, embarrassed by the growing scandal. His own children faced questions in school, and his household felt the weight of his actions. Meanwhile, the little girl's family continued to receive support from neighbors, community groups, and even strangers who sent letters of encouragement. It was clear to many that the difference between the two households came down to one simple truth: one had chosen a wrong action, while the other had chosen courage to speak out. Community groups began to organize meetings more regularly. Parents, teachers, and even religious leaders gathered to discuss how to protect children better. Posters appeared on walls, reminding everyone to speak up if something felt wrong. Schools started workshops about safety, teaching children that their voices mattered and that no one, no matter their position, was allowed to cross boundaries. What had started as a single family's painful experience was now shaping an entire town's approach to protection and respect. Inside the police station, the senior officials could no longer avoid the growing call for action. They decided to prepare the final report. In it, they wrote about the seriousness of the act, the harm it had caused to the girl, and the embarrassment it had brought to the force. They clearly stated that the explanation of it being a joke was unacceptable. Their language was firm: such conduct was in direct violation of the professional code of ethics. The recommendation at the end of the report was simple and clear: the officer should be removed from service permanently. The head officer read the report several times before signing it. He knew this decision would be remembered for years. He also knew that if he did not act firmly, the respect for every officer in the department would suffer. Finally, he put his signature at the bottom of the page, sealing the recommendation that the man should lose his position. When word of this recommendation reached the town, it spread quickly. Community leaders expressed relief. Parents felt their voices had been heard. The little girl's family was informed privately before the news became public. The mother cried quietly when she heard, not from sadness but from the release of weeks of tension. The father sat in silence for a long time, holding his daughter's hand, and finally whispered, "Justice is near." The girl herself listened carefully, not fully understanding the weight of every detail, but she could sense from her parents' faces that something important had been achieved. The officer who faced dismissal tried one last time to appeal. He claimed that he had been treated unfairly, that the punishment was too heavy. But his appeal was rejected. The committee reminded him that when someone wears a uniform, their actions are judged by a higher standard, and one careless act can cause harm far greater than they imagine. His removal was not just a punishment, it was a statement that no one, no matter their position, could be allowed to cross the line of respect and safety. News channels covered the story extensively. Interviews with lawyers, psychologists, and parents filled the airwaves. Some programs focused on the bravery of the little girl, saying her courage had made the entire system face its responsibilities. Others discussed the need for reforms in the way officers were trained and supervised. The case had grown far beyond the boundaries of one town; it became a lesson for other places too. The little girl's family continued to live quietly, avoiding too much media attention. But people still came to their home with messages of support. Teachers at her school treated her with extra care, making sure she felt safe in the classroom. Friends invited her to play more often, trying to give her moments of joy and laughter. Slowly, the heavy memory began to fade into the background, though it never fully disappeared. At the same time, the police department introduced new measures. Officers were reminded about their responsibilities during special workshops. New rules were written to prevent misconduct, and senior officials promised regular monitoring of behavior. They explained that the dismissal of one officer was not the end, it was only the beginning of restoring trust. They wanted the community to believe again that the uniform represented protection, not fear. For the community, the case became a turning point. Parents felt more confident to raise their voices if something felt wrong. Children were encouraged to speak openly about their feelings. Leaders in schools, religious places, and clubs all repeated the same message: respect and safety must always come first. The story of one wrong act had become a movement of right actions. In her own way, the little girl began to heal. She still remembered that strange moment on the street, but now she also remembered the power of her voice. She had told the truth, her parents had stood by her, and the entire town had supported her. In her heart, she began to understand that sometimes pain can lead to strength, and that even the smallest voice can bring change when it speaks with courage. The suspended officer, now dismissed, quietly left the town. His name became a reminder of what happens when respect is lost. People mentioned him as an example in conversations, not with anger anymore but with a sense of warning. They said, "This is why we must always hold our officers to the highest standard." His departure closed one chapter, but the lessons remained. The little girl's family, though still humble and simple, carried themselves with quiet pride. They had not sought fame or recognition, only justice. And justice, at last, had begun to show itself. The story was moving toward its final moment, the official public announcement that would confirm everything. But even before that, the girl's courage had already reshaped her community. Respect for the uniform was no longer blind, it was now tied to responsibility. And the girl, though young, had already written her place in the town's memory as the child who reminded everyone that truth, no matter how small it may seem, has the power to shake even the strongest walls. The weeks of waiting finally came to an end. The police department announced that the final decision had been made. A press conference was called in the town hall, and everyone knew this would be the day when justice would be seen clearly. Parents, reporters, teachers, and community leaders all gathered in the hall, their eyes fixed on the front stage. Cameras were set up, microphones lined the tables, and the head officer walked in with a file in his hand. His face was calm but serious. When the officer began speaking, the entire room grew silent. He explained that after a thorough investigation, after listening to all witnesses, reviewing professional reports, and examining every detail, the conclusion was clear. The act committed by the policeman was unacceptable, unprofessional, and harmful. The decision of the review board was final: the officer was dismissed from his duties and would never again serve in the police force. The hall erupted with murmurs. Some nodded their heads in agreement, others whispered with relief, and many clapped softly to show support. Parents who had been worried for their own children felt a weight lift off their shoulders. Reporters quickly raised their cameras and sent out the news to every corner of the region. The dismissal was no longer just a rumor, it was a fact. The policeman had lost his badge, his position, and the respect he once carried. The little girl's parents received the news at home. They were invited to attend the conference, but they chose to stay away from the crowd to protect their daughter's privacy. Instead, they watched the announcement on television. The mother held her daughter close as tears rolled down her cheeks. The father sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the screen, then turned to his daughter and said, "You see? The truth always wins." The girl smiled faintly, not fully grasping the importance of the moment, but she could feel the warmth in her parents' voices. That evening, neighbors came to visit. They congratulated the family for standing firm and praised the little girl for her bravery. Some brought home-cooked meals, others brought flowers. The atmosphere in the house, once heavy with worry, was now filled with light conversation, gentle laughter, and a sense of victory. It was not a celebration of punishment, but a celebration of justice. The parents thanked everyone for their support, explaining that they never wanted revenge, only fairness and safety. In the following days, newspapers carried headlines like "Officer Dismissed After Misconduct" and "Brave Child's Voice Brings Change." Television programs replayed clips of the press conference and interviewed community leaders who said this case would serve as an example for the entire country. Social media filled with posts applauding the little girl and her family. Some called her the voice of truth, while others simply said, "She reminded us to speak up." The police department, though shaken by the scandal, took steps to rebuild trust. Officers were sent for training sessions on professional conduct. Posters were put up in the station reminding everyone of their duty to protect, not to harm. A new hotline was created for citizens to report misconduct safely and without fear. These steps were small, but they showed that the department had learned from its mistake. For the little girl, life slowly returned to normal. She went back to school, walked with her friends, and played in the park. Her parents still accompanied her more often than before, but over time, they began to give her the freedom she once had. Her classmates, who once whispered about her, now looked at her with respect. Some even told her they admired her courage. Teachers praised her quietly, reminding the other children that if something wrong ever happened to them, they too should speak up. One afternoon, as she walked home holding her father's hand, she asked softly, "Am I really brave?" Her father stopped, knelt down to her level, and smiled. "Yes, you are. Being brave doesn't mean you are never afraid. It means you told the truth even when you were afraid. That is the bravest thing anyone can do." She hugged him tightly, her small heart filled with pride. The community continued to grow stronger from the lessons learned. Parents began to talk more openly with their children, asking questions about their daily lives, encouraging them to share anything unusual. Schools introduced new lessons about trust and respect. Leaders of the town held more meetings to keep safety a priority. The story of one girl had changed the behavior of an entire town. Meanwhile, the dismissed officer quietly left the town. He packed his belongings and moved away, unable to face the stares and whispers that followed him everywhere. His departure brought closure. People no longer spoke his name with anger but with a sense of warning, reminding each other of the importance of accountability. His story became a lesson, not just for the police but for everyone in authority. The uniform is not a shield to hide behind, it is a promise to serve with respect. Months passed, and the girl began to heal fully. She laughed more, played more, and slowly the shadow of that one painful moment grew smaller in her mind. Her parents still kept watch over her, but they also allowed her to enjoy her childhood again. They knew they could not erase what had happened, but they also knew they had transformed it into something powerful. Their daughter's truth had brought justice, and her courage had inspired change. Years later, people in the town would still remember the case. They would talk about how one family stood up for what was right, how a child's small voice grew into a movement, and how justice had been done. The story became part of the town's history, told to new generations as a reminder that trust is sacred, respect is essential, and courage can change the world. For the little girl, it was never about fame or attention. She only wanted to feel safe, to walk her streets without fear. And in the end, that is exactly what she regained. She learned that even when trust is broken, it can be rebuilt not by silence, but by truth. She discovered that the world, though sometimes unfair, can also listen and correct itself when people stand together. The journey had been long, filled with fear, sadness, courage, and strength. But in the end, the story found its rightful ending. A wrong act had been met with justice. A young girl had spoken, her parents had stood firm, the community had supported them, and the system had responded. It was a reminder to everyone that no matter how small a voice may seem, when it carries the truth, it has the power to shake even the strongest walls and bring light where darkness once stood.